Think of someone you know. Smart, successful, the kind of person who got the promotions, who reads the news, who could probably explain the stock market to you at dinner. And yet, every month, somehow, there's nothing left. No savings, no breathing room. Just enough to make it to the next paycheck. You've seen this person. Maybe you married this person. Maybe you are this person. And here's the question nobody asks out loud. How can someone this sharp be this broke? It's not bad luck. It's not a lack of information. It's not even a lack of effort. It's a pattern. A quiet, invisible pattern running underneath every decision that person makes with money. And the strange part is, being smart doesn't protect you from it. Sometimes it just makes the excuses more convincing. Because being good with ideas and being good with money are two different skills. And tonight, we're talking about the gap between them, and why closing it might be the most important lesson you never learned in school. Let's start with the first pattern, the quiet one, the one that never announces itself. It's called lifestyle creep, and if you've ever gotten a raise and thought, finally, some breathing room, only to find yourself just as tight 3 months later. You already know this pattern from the inside. Here's how it works. You get a promotion, a 10% raise, maybe more. And you don't do anything reckless. You don't buy a yacht. You just upgrade. A slightly nicer car lease, a slightly bigger house. Dinners out that used to be occasional now happen twice a week because you can afford it now, right? The gym membership becomes the gym membership plus the trainer. The vacation becomes the vacation plus the upgraded flight. Each decision on its own is completely reasonable. Nobody would call any single one of them reckless. That's exactly why it works. Lifestyle creep doesn't hit you with one big blow. It bleeds you with 100 small ones, each one small enough to justify, each one invisible on its own. And here's the part that stings a little. The smarter you are, the better you get at justifying it. You don't just spend more, you build a case for why this particular expense makes sense. You've earned it. You work hard. Life is short. All true. All beside the point, because the raise was supposed to build your future. Instead, it just raised the cost of staying exactly where you are, only now with a nicer view. Think about it for a second. If someone handed you a chart showing your income rising every year for a decade, you'd expect your savings to rise with it. That's the story we're told. More money in, more money saved. But for a huge number of smart, successful people, the chart looks different. Income climbs steadily. Savings stay flat, sometimes for years at a time. And nobody sits down one day and decides, I will now spend every extra dollar I make. It just happens, one upgrade at a time, each one small enough to slip past the part of the brain that's supposed to be paying attention. Now let's talk about the second pattern. This one hides behind something that looks like virtue. Research. You know this type. Maybe you are this type. The person who reads every article, watches every video, compares every platform, runs the numbers 3 different ways, and never actually opens the account, never actually moves the money, never actually starts. It's called analysis paralysis, and it's cruel in a specific way. It disguises procrastination as diligence. You're not avoiding the decision. You're still researching. You're not scared. You're being thorough. And because you're smart, because you've spent a career being rewarded for careful thinking, this feels like exactly the right approach. But money isn't like most problems you've solved in your career. Most of your career rewarded you for finding the right answer before you acted. Money rewards you for acting, even imperfectly. And then adjusting. The person who invested in an okay index fund 10 years ago is almost always further ahead than the person who's still comparing the best one today. Somewhere along the way, more information stopped helping and started hiding the fact that no decision was ever going to feel completely safe. And so the search continues. Comfortable, responsible looking, and expensive in a way that never shows up as a single transaction. Just as 10 years quietly gone. And now, the third pattern. This is the one wrapped in the most convincing packaging of all. Logic. Emotional spending isn't new. Everyone knows what it looks like when someone is obviously spiraling, obviously grieving, obviously spending to feel something. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about spending. That comes dressed as a decision. I deserve this. It's an investment in myself. I work hard. This is self-care. Every one of these sentences might be true, and every one of them can also be the exact phrase a very intelligent brain uses to skip past an emotional impulse and land on a rational-sounding justification after the decision has already been made. This is the pattern that fools smart people the most, because it doesn't feel like impulse. It feels like reasoning. You didn't just want the thing. You built an argument for the thing. And a well-built argument is very hard to argue with, especially when you're the one who built it. The truth is quieter and less flattering. The purchase came first. The logic came second, dressed up to look like it came first. 3 patterns, and you've probably lived inside at least one of them this year. Lifestyle creep that hides in reasonable-looking upgrades. Analysis paralysis that hides behind the appearance of careful thinking. Emotional spending that hides behind rational language. None of them look like sabotage while they're happening. That's what makes them so effective and so common, even among people who, on paper, should absolutely know better. Because knowing better was never really the issue. It never was. And that's exactly where we're headed next. So if it's not information, and it's not intelligence, what is it? Where does this pattern actually come from? It comes from somewhere much older than your first paycheck. Older than your first credit card. Older even than the day you decided what you wanted to be when you grew up. It comes from the kitchen table. Think back. Not to some big dramatic memory, but to the small, ordinary moments. The sound your parents' voices made when a bill arrived. Whether money was talked about openly or whispered about after the kids were sent to bed. Whether there was enough or a specific kind of silence that meant there wasn't. Maybe you grew up where money was scarce, and every dollar was treated like it might be the last one. Maybe you grew up where money was never discussed, like it was slightly embarrassing, something adults handled behind closed doors. Maybe you grew up watching one parent spend and the other panic, and you learned, without anyone teaching you, which role you were supposed to play. None of this was written down anywhere. Nobody sat you down and said, "Here is what money means," but you absorbed it anyway. The way children absorb almost everything, not through explanation, but through repetition, through tone, through what was said, and just as loudly, through what wasn't. Psychologists call these money scripts, unconscious beliefs about money formed by the time you were 7 that keep running quietly in the background for the rest of your life. Long after the house you grew up in is gone. Long after the people who taught you those lessons aren't here anymore. And here's what makes this so hard to see in yourself. A script doesn't feel like a belief. It feels like a fact. If you grew up believing money is something you're not supposed to talk about, you don't experience that as a belief you hold. You experience it as simply true, the way you experience the sky as blue. You're not choosing discomfort when the subject comes up. You're just uncomfortable. If you grew up in scarcity, you might now have plenty, a good salary, a stable job, a life nothing like the one you grew up in, and still feel a low hum of anxiety every time you check your bank account, still hoard in some areas and panic spend in others, still not quite believe the number in front of you is real. If you grew up watching money used as a reward or a punishment, you can have that if you behave. You don't deserve that this month. You might now still tie your spending to some invisible scorecard of whether you've earned it, whether you've been good enough. This is the part that surprises people the most. None of this requires a difficult childhood. Some of the most stubborn money scripts come from perfectly loving homes, where the message wasn't cruelty, just silence. Money simply wasn't a subject, and in that silence, children fill in their own meaning, usually the meaning that money is somehow dangerous, or shameful, or complicated in a way most other subjects aren't. By the time you're an adult, smart, capable, good at your job, you're not making decisions from a blank slate. You're making them through a lens you didn't choose and mostly can't see, built by a version of you that hadn't lived enough life yet to know better. That's the part almost nobody tells you. You didn't fail to learn the lesson. You learned it perfectly. You just learned the wrong one at an age when you had no way of knowing the difference. And scripts like this don't stay in childhood. They come to the table every time you make a financial decision as an adult. Quietly, without announcing themselves, dressed up as your own free choice. Think about the decade you grew up in, because that matters too. If you were raised in the 70s or 80s, money probably meant something tangible. Cash in an envelope, a checkbook balanced by hand at the kitchen table, a drawer where the bills were kept and quietly worried over. There was a physical weight to money then. You could see it running low. You could feel an empty wallet in your hand. Compare that to how money moves today. Numbers on a screen, a tap of a card, a subscription that renews without you lifting a finger. The scripts you inherited were built for a world where money had weight and friction. The world you're spending in now has almost none. That mismatch alone explains a lot of what feels like self-sabotage, but is really just an old map used on new terrain. This is worth sitting with, because it's not about blame. Your parents weren't trying to teach you something broken. They did the best they could with what they'd inherited, from their own kitchen tables, their own silences, their own version of not enough. This gets passed down, generation to generation, not through a lesson, but through repetition, which means the pattern you're carrying isn't really yours. Not originally. You inherited it the way you might have inherited your father's temper or your mother's way of worrying. And once you can see it that way, not as a personal failure, but as an old script running on autopilot, something starts to loosen. Not everything. Not yet. But something. Now here's the part of this video where I have to be honest with you, even if it stings a little. Because you might have watched 50 financial education videos before this one. You might have read the books. You might know, on paper, exactly what you're supposed to do. Spend less than you earn, invest early, avoid debt, build an emergency fund. None of this is a mystery to you. You could probably teach the class, and you're still broke, or close enough to it that it keeps you up some nights, quietly, in the dark, when nobody's watching. So let's ask the uncomfortable question directly. If you already know what to do, why isn't it working? You didn't need one more fact, one more statistic, one more expert telling you that compound interest is powerful or that debt is expensive. You already knew that. Somewhere in you, you've always known that. The problem is that financial behavior isn't run by the part of your brain that reads books and watches videos. It's run by something older, faster, and much less interested in your 5-year plan. Think about the last time you made an emotional purchase you regretted. In that moment, did you not know it was a bad idea? Of course you knew. You weren't missing data. You were standing in a moment where an old automatic pattern took the wheel before the thoughtful, informed part of you even got a vote. By the time your rational brain showed up to weigh in, the decision was already made. All that was left for it to do was write the justification afterward. This is why financial education alone has such a spotty track record. It speaks entirely to the part of the brain that was never actually driving the car. It's like handing someone a beautifully detailed map while they're asleep at the wheel. The map isn't wrong. It's just irrelevant to what's actually happening. Think of it this way. Imagine you've watched every driving safety video ever made. You know braking distances. You know the physics of a skid. You know exactly what to do in every dangerous scenario, in theory. Now imagine you're driving, exhausted at the end of a long day, and someone cuts you off without warning. Your foot hits the brake before a single thought crosses your mind. That reaction didn't come from the videos. It came from something faster, older, wired in long before you ever sat in a classroom. Financial behavior works the same way, except instead of protecting you from a collision, that fast old wiring is often steering you straight into one over and over, dollar by dollar. And here's where it gets personal for anyone watching this in their 40s, 50s, or beyond. The frustration compounds with age. When you're 25 and you make a bad financial decision, there's an assumption, fair or not, that you're still learning, still figuring it out, still young enough for it not to matter yet. But when you're 45, 55, and you're still watching the same pattern repeat, there's a specific kind of shame that shows up. Not just, I made a mistake, but I should know better by now. I've had decades to fix this. What is wrong with me that I still do this? I want to say something plainly because I think you need to hear it as directly as I can put it. There is nothing wrong with you. You are not lacking discipline. You are not weak-willed or lazy or somehow uniquely bad with money while everyone else has it figured out. You are running on a system that was built to protect you decades ago in circumstances that no longer exist. And that system has never once been updated because nobody ever told you it needed updating. Nobody handed you the manual for that. And maybe you've noticed this yourself in some other part of your life that has nothing to do with money. Maybe there's a certain kind of comment that still stings exactly the way it did when you were 14. Even though you're a grown adult with decades of evidence that you're capable and worthy of respect, maybe there's a certain kind of silence in a room that still makes your stomach tighten, for reasons that trace back further than you can consciously explain. Money isn't special in this regard. It's just one more area where an old automatic response still runs the show, long after the original reason for it has disappeared. Willpower was never going to be enough. Because willpower operates in the same slow, tired, thoughtful part of the brain that shows up late to every automatic decision. You cannot outdiscipline a pattern that operates faster than conscious thought. You've probably tried. You've probably promised yourself more than once. This time will be different. Right before falling into the exact same groove a few weeks later. Not because you didn't mean it, but because meaning it was never the missing ingredient. So if willpower and information were never going to be enough on their own, what actually works? That's where we're headed, because there is an answer. And it's not another motivational speech about discipline. It's something quieter, more mechanical, and far more effective than trying harder ever was. So if trying harder isn't the answer, what is? Consider a study that stuck with me for years. Researchers looked at organ donation rates across European countries, and the numbers were strange at first glance. In some countries, almost everyone was a registered donor. In neighboring countries, almost nobody was. Same culture, similar values, similar healthcare systems. So what explained the gap? It wasn't persuasion. It wasn't a country full of more generous people convincing another country full of less generous people. It was a single line on a government form. In the countries with high donation rates, the form was set up so you were automatically a donor unless you checked a box to opt out. In the countries with low rates, you had to actively check a box to opt in. That's it. That's the entire difference. Not motivation, not moral character, just which action required effort and which didn't. This is the part almost nobody tells you about behavior change. The environment usually beats the intention. Not sometimes. Almost always. You can have the strongest intention in the world, but if the path of least resistance leads toward the bad decision, you will, with depressing reliability, end up making the bad decision, not because you're weak, but because that's what environments do to behavior. They quietly decide which choice takes effort and which doesn't, and effort is the deciding vote far more often than we like to admit. Now apply that same lens to your money. Right now, what is the path of least resistance in your financial life? For most people, it's spending. The money sits in a checking account, visible, accessible, one tap away on a phone screen at 11 at night, when your guard is down and your emotions are doing the deciding. Saving, meanwhile, requires a decision. An active choice, made cold, made against the current. Usually made at the exact moment you're least equipped to make it. Because saving decisions rarely happen when you're calm and clear-headed. They happen in the same moments the spending decisions do. This is why just be more disciplined has never worked, for you or almost anyone. You're not fighting a lack of willpower. You're fighting an environment engineered, not maliciously, just structurally, to make spending the default and saving the exception. And here's the reframe that changes everything. If the environment is doing most of the work in the wrong direction, the answer isn't more discipline pointed at the same environment. The answer is redesigning the environment so the default points the other way. Not fighting the current, redirecting it. This is the exact mechanism that separates people who build wealth slowly and quietly over decades from people who earn just as much, sometimes more, and stay flat their whole lives. It's rarely a difference in income. It's rarely even a difference in knowledge. It's a difference in which decision requires effort and which one doesn't. The people who build wealth aren't making better decisions more often than you. They've simply arranged their lives so the good decision happens automatically, and the bad one requires a deliberate, effortful choice to override it. Think about what that means. It means you don't need to become a different person. You don't need more discipline, more motivation, more willpower than you currently have. You need to change what the default is. So on the nights you're tired, distracted, or simply not thinking about money at all, the thing that happens automatically is the thing that actually serves you. That's not a mindset shift. That's a mechanical one. Mechanical shifts are far easier to follow through on than mindset shifts ever are, because they don't depend on how you feel on any given day. They work whether you're motivated or not. They work whether you remember or not. That's the entire point. Let me give you one more way to think about this, especially if you're 40, 50, 60, and looking back at decades of good intentions that somehow never quite landed. You've probably told yourself some version of, "I'll be better with money starting now." A new year, a new job, a milestone birthday. Each time, a fresh wave of resolve, and each time, within weeks, the same old patterns creep in back, quiet and familiar, like a habit that never really left the house. If that's been your experience, hear this clearly. That wasn't a failure of character. That was the predictable outcome of trying to solve a structural problem with an emotional solution. Resolve fades. It always does. Not because you're uniquely bad at keeping promises to yourself, but because resolve is a feeling, and feelings are, by nature, temporary. Structure doesn't fade the same way. A structure you build once keeps working on the days you forget it exists, on the days you're too tired to think about money. This is the quiet difference between people who seem to effortlessly handle money and people who white-knuckle their way through every month. It was never effortless for them. They just moved the effort to a single moment, up front, when they built the structure, instead of spreading it out across every day, forever, fighting the same battle against a current that never stops pulling. So let's get specific, not motivational. Specific. Vague advice like, "Pay yourself first" sounds nice on a poster and does nothing at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night when you're tired and your phone is right there. The first shift is automation, and I mean this literally. Set up a transfer from your checking account to your savings or investment account that happens automatically, the same day your paycheck lands, before you ever see the money sitting there tempting you. Not a reminder to transfer money. Not a note in your calendar. An actual standing instruction that moves the money without requiring you to decide at all. Here's why this matters. Remember, the path of least resistance almost always wins. If saving requires you to log in, decide on an amount, and hit transfer every month, you've built a system that depends on your motivation showing up reliably forever, without fail. That's not a system. That's a hope. But if the money moves before you ever have a chance to decide otherwise, saving stops being a decision you make. It becomes a thing that simply happens to you, the same way your rent or mortgage happens to you every month, whether you feel like paying it or not. This is the same principle that makes 401k contributions so much more effective than voluntary saving. It's not that people who contribute to retirement accounts have more willpower. It's that the money is gone before it ever touches their checking account, before it becomes visible, before it has the chance to compete against a Tuesday night impulse. You cannot spend what you never see. That sentence might be worth more than every budgeting app you've ever downloaded and abandoned. The second shift is what I'll call a cooling off period, designed to interrupt the exact pattern we talked about earlier. the one where the purchase happens first, and the justification gets built afterward. Here's the rule. For any purchase above a certain amount, one you decide on for yourself, you wait 24 hours before buying it. No exceptions, no talking yourself out of the rule, just this once. This works because it doesn't fight the impulse directly. It delays it long enough for the slower, more thoughtful part of your brain to catch up and get a vote. Most impulses, even strong ones, lose a lot of their pull after a single day. Not all of them, but enough that this one habit alone can quietly save you thousands of dollars a year. Not by making you more disciplined, but by giving your better judgment time to show up. And here's a version of this specifically for the emotional spending we talked about. The "I deserve this" kind. When you feel that pull, ask yourself a different question than "Can I afford this?" Ask instead, what am I actually feeling right now, underneath the wanting? Sometimes the honest answer is tired. Sometimes it's lonely. Sometimes it's simply bored, or overlooked, or a little sad about something that has nothing to do with money at all. The purchase was never going to fix that feeling. It was only going to distract from it for a few hours before the feeling came back, along with a bill. The third shift is making money visible instead of abstract, because abstraction is where this self-sabotage hides most comfortably. When your spending is scattered across a dozen subscriptions, a handful of cards, and an app you glance at once a month, of course it feels impossible to control. You can't manage what you can't see clearly. And right now, for most people, money has become almost invisible. A number on a screen that changes without much friction or feeling attached to it. So make it visible again. Look at your actual balance, not the rounded version in your head. Categorize your spending, even roughly, so you can see with your own eyes where the money is actually going, not where you assume it's going. This single act, simply looking clearly and honestly, without judgment, does something that no amount of willpower ever could. It turns an abstract, anxious feeling about money into a concrete, specific picture you can actually work with. There's a strange comfort that comes with this kind of clarity, even when the numbers aren't great. Uncertainty is almost always more exhausting than bad news. The vague, low-grade dread of "I don't really know where I stand" tends to weigh on people more heavily over years than an honest, specific number ever does. Once you can see it, you can work with it. Before that, you're just carrying a fog around with you, and fog is exhausting to live inside, year after year. None of these three shifts, automating the transfer, building in the pause, making the money visible, require you to become a fundamentally different person. That's the part I want you to sit with. You don't need a personality transplant. You don't need to suddenly love spreadsheets. You need 3 small mechanical changes to how your money moves and how clearly you can see it. Changes you make once that then keep working quietly in the background on the good days and the hard days alike, whether you're thinking about them or not. Now, before we go further, I want to pause for a second. If you've stayed with me this far, you're not the kind of person just looking for a quick fix. You're someone who actually wants to understand something, all the way down. That's rare, and if that's you, I'd genuinely love to have you back here. So if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel and join us here every day, because we go deep like this on money, on behavior, on the things nobody else in this space wants to slow down long enough to actually explain properly. And here's something I want to say directly to you. Whoever you are, wherever you're watching this from, if you've made it this far, I have a feeling you already recognize yourself somewhere in this video. Maybe it was the lifestyle creep. Maybe it was the research that never turns into action. Maybe it was a memory from that kitchen table you hadn't thought about in years. Whatever it was, know this plainly. You are not behind. You're not broken. You are, quite simply, a person who inherited a pattern nobody ever taught you how to see. And sitting here right now, willing to look at it directly, already puts you ahead of most people who never will. Let's get back into it, because there's one more piece of this puzzle, and it might be the most important one. Everything we've talked about, automation, the cooling off period, making money visible, none of it works if you're still carrying shame about how you got here. Shame is, in its own quiet way, one of the most expensive emotions a person can carry around a bank account. Here's what shame does. It makes you avoid looking. It makes you avoid opening the account, avoid checking the balance, avoid the conversation with a partner or advisor, because looking directly at the problem means confronting the feeling that you should have handled this better by now. So the shame, instead of motivating change, does the opposite. It keeps you from looking closely enough to change anything. It's a closed loop. The very feeling meant to signal, "Fix this," is the same feeling that prevents you from fixing it. This is especially true for the audience I'm talking to right now. People in their 40s, 50s, 60s, who've built careers, raised families, accomplished real things, and who feel a quiet embarrassment about a situation they think they should have figured out by now. I want to gently push back on that word. Should implies there was a manual you failed to read. There wasn't one. Nobody handed you a manual. You did your best with the tools you were given, and some of those tools were never built for the world you actually had to live in. So here's the honest reframe. The goal was never to arrive at some point where you've figured it out completely and permanently. Nobody actually lives there. Not the wealthy person on your street, not the person who seems to have it all together on social media. The goal is simply to be a little more aware today than yesterday, to catch one pattern this month you didn't catch last month, to build one small piece of structure that removes one decision from your future self, who's going to be just as tired and just as human as you are right now. That's it. Not perfection. Just a slightly better system than yesterday's, put in place quietly, without fanfare. And there's something else worth saying. The people who eventually get this right. The ones who look back at 60 or 70 with a life built on something solid, almost never describe a single dramatic turning point. There's no scene where the music swells and everything changes overnight. What they describe, almost every time, is quieter than that. A conversation finally had with a spouse after years of avoiding it. An automatic transfer set up on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon and then mostly forgotten about. A decision to actually look at the number instead of guessing at it. Small, unremarkable moments that, stacked over years, added up to something that looks, from the outside, like it must have required heroic willpower. It didn't. It just required starting once and letting the structure carry the weight willpower was never built to carry. I think about this especially for anyone watching who feels like they're starting late. Late compared to what? Compared to some imaginary version of yourself who got it right at 25? That person doesn't exist. The version of you sitting here right now is the only version who's ever going to be in a position to start. Not the 25-year-old who's long gone, not some future version who's magically more disciplined. You today, exactly as you are. And if I'm honest, that's really the whole message underneath this video. Not a trick, not a hack. Just the quiet, unglamorous truth that the pattern you've been fighting isn't a character flaw. It's an old script running on autopilot, and scripts can be rewritten. Not in one dramatic sitting. Slowly, mechanically. One small structural change at a time, until one day you look up and realize the old pattern isn't running the show anymore. Let's go back to where we started. That person you thought of at the very beginning. Smart, successful, somehow always broke. Maybe by now you've stopped picturing someone else. Maybe somewhere around the kitchen table, or the cooling off period, or the word should. The face in that memory quietly became your own. That's all right. That was always going to happen. That's actually the whole point of a video like this one. Because here's what I know to be true. After all these years of watching people wrestle with money, myself included, the pattern doesn't announce itself when it finally starts to loosen. There's no fireworks, no dramatic before and after. One day, you just notice you didn't check the price of something before deciding whether you deserved it. One day, you glance at your balance without that familiar tightening in your chest. One day, the automatic transfer goes through, quietly, in the background, and you don't even think about it, because it's simply what happens now. The same way the bills get paid, the same way the sun comes up. That's not a small thing. That's the entire transformation, actually happening in the most unremarkable way possible. Nobody throws a parade for it. Nobody posts about it. It just becomes the new quiet truth of how you live. You are still going to make mistakes with money. So am I. So does everyone, including the people who look from the outside like they've got it all figured out. That was never the goal here. And if you were hoping this video would leave you flawless, I want to be honest with you one last time. That version of you doesn't exist, and chasing it is its own kind of trap. The goal was smaller than that, and quieter than that, and I think far more achievable. Just to see the pattern clearly enough that it stops running you without your permission. You didn't choose the kitchen table you grew up around. You didn't choose the silence or the scarcity or the version of money that got handed down to you before you were old enough to question any of it. But you get to choose what happens from here. Not through willpower, not through some sudden burst of discipline you've never quite been able to sustain before. Through structure, through one small mechanical decision made once that keeps working quietly on your behalf long after you've stopped thinking about it. Somewhere, right now, there's a transfer you haven't set up yet. A balance you haven't looked at honestly in longer than you'd like to admit. A purchase you're about to make that could use 24 hours of distance before it becomes real. None of these are dramatic. None of them require you to become someone else. They just require you to start, once, today, in whatever small way is actually available to you. I think about all the conversations that never happen because of exactly what we talked about today. The shame, the silence, the assumption that everyone else has this figured out except you. Somewhere tonight, a husband and wife will lie in bed a few feet apart, both quietly worried about money, both saying nothing, because saying something first feels too much like admitting failure. Somewhere, an adult child will avoid asking their aging parents a hard question about their finances, because the subject still feels the way it always did at that old kitchen table. Off limits, best left alone. And somewhere, Someone exactly like the person you pictured at the start of this video will watch this, recognize every word, and still do nothing. Because recognizing a pattern and acting on it have never been the same thing. I hope you're not that person tonight. I hope something in the last hour gave you enough distance from the pattern to see it clearly. The way you'd see a photograph of yourself instead of just the feeling of being yourself. That distance is worth more than any tip, any hack, any 5-step plan. It's the thing that makes everything else in this video actually usable. If you've made it all the way here, to the very end of this video, thank you for spending this time with me. That's not a small thing either, in a world built to pull your attention in 50 directions before you finish a single thought. If this found something in you, a memory, a pattern, a piece of yourself you hadn't quite named until now, do 2 things for me. Follow the channel so we can keep having conversations like this one. And if you think of someone who needs to hear this, someone who's smart and successful and still somehow can't seem to get ahead, send it to them. Not 1 person, 5. You'd be surprised how many people are quietly carrying exactly what we talked about today, waiting for someone to finally say it out loud. And before you go, leave a comment, an honest one. Tell me which part of this actually landed for you. The lifestyle creep, the kitchen table, the shame, the 24-hour rule. And tell me what you want me to dig into next, because this channel exists for exactly this kind of conversation, and I'd rather build it around what you're actually carrying than what I assume you want to hear. I'll see you in the next one.